So yesterday we started to reflect. We've looked at different hearts in the scriptures, and we'll look at more. And yesterday though we started looking at our own human heart and just the human heart in general. So we looked at the bearing the beams of love, and in that time, in that reflection or meditation, we were really trying to look at how we recognize those inner movements of love within us, those opportunities that break in upon us, those things that come as a gift. They're unexpected, because every moment of genuine love, be it great or small, profound or more simple, all of those movements are ultimately movements of our loving Father breaking in on us. And later on we'll reflect on the heart of the Father, the heart of Jesus, and the heart of the Holy Spirit. But we're building up to that. So any movement of love is ultimately calling us to a movement to respond to the ultimate love. Now we want to look in this meditation at the life of our heart, just to see how it moves around. We know that love is a calling. It's an insatiable calling. It's unstoppable. We may try to drown it because people have been hurt, because people have had a bad experience, and so they think love is not for me. Love is not for me is like saying life is not for me. Humanity is not for me. It is insanity. And yet enough people in this world, because of the violence, the hatred, the selfishness that exists, have wrongly resorted to such condition or such a conclusion. But in fact, the Christian is very much called to say to the world, and to live it first of all in his or her life, that love is our ultimate calling. So we need to explore then what the life of the heart is all about, because there are many conflicting movements within us. Not every movement of our heart is actually a movement towards love. Even though love is somehow masquerading, there's also the problem of addictions. So we will get to that. Love is the most important quality of human life, at the least comprehensible. I am a little embarrassed to think how much, this is Gerald May talking in his book, The Awakened Heart. I am a little embarrassed to think how much time and energy I have spent trying to understand love. It's a real man question, you know. Men want to understand things. Women just tend to experience it, and they go with the flow much more readily than most men do. Perhaps I believe my concepts and definitions of love would help me do it better or make it more safe. No such luck. I do not think we can ever adequately define or understand love. I do not think we were ever meant to. We are meant to participate in love without really comprehending it. That is very, very important. We're supposed to just throw ourselves into love. Don't worry about the dog. He's enjoying the creation around him, or her, whatever. We're meant to throw ourselves into love. Yes, there's an intelligibility about love, but there's also a lot of mystery about it. And Gerald May here says that we cannot really define love adequately. St. John Paul II, being the great philosopher that he was, did define it, and he says, love is a sincere gift of self. Love is a sincere gift of self. And this is a theme really that runs through his writings. I first came across it in his letter to families in 1994, 2nd of February, but it really keeps on appearing. This understanding that humanity, as human beings made in God's image and likeness, with intelligence and free will, we are meant to make of our lives a gift for others in love. So love is a sincere gift of self. He defines it. And anyway, but use that if it's helpful to you. There are certainly other definitions we could give for it. But I think May's most important point here is that no matter what definition we can give for love, we are never going to understand it. There's a mystery, and the decision we make is either we participate in it, or out of fear of getting involved in something that we don't fully understand, we actually close ourselves to it and end up frustrating ourselves because we're not doing the very thing for which we were created to do, to love. It is the same for all important things in life. There is a mystery within them that our definitions and understandings cannot grasp. Definitions and understandings are images and concepts created by our brains to symbolize what is real. Our thoughts about something are never the thing itself. Now, we may think, for example, that love is some combination of helpful action, tender feelings, committed relationship, and romance. These are indeed aspects of love, but they bear about as much resemblance to love itself as raindrops to weather or waves to the sea. To the extent that we try to love according to such forms, we suffer from both psychological and spiritual neurosis. Psychologically, we cannot be fully ourselves in love. Spiritually, we miss love's holy mystery. So what he's saying is not that these things have nothing to do with loving. They have a lot to do with loving. But if we're trying to engage in love, if this is our fundamental call in life as disciples of Christ, as committed Christians, that then we will forever end up trying to follow concepts rather than actually responding to the inner movement. And love, just like faith and hope, isn't one of those virtues that we're meant to talk about and theorize about and write about, but rather we're meant to live. We're meant to live it. And so the form that love will take in each of our lives will in fact be a slightly different, and that's part of our uniqueness. But we will see a common thread in love in all of our lives. So for a moment now, let's just do a little exercise about your love story, your experience of love in your life. And just take a few moments as you're praying here and listening. How have you experienced love in your life? Whether there's been some key relationships there with another man, perhaps with a dear friend at school. Obviously, there's the love and the drawing that you felt from Christ himself. Perhaps the greatest loving experience have come from your own family. Perhaps it was a grandmother or a grandfather with whom you had a really special relationship, because your greatest understanding, here am I using the word, for love and responding is your own life story. And while we can hear about love stories all over the place and they warm up our hearts, ultimately the question for us is, how have I responded to the love opportunities that have come in my life? Because the more I become open to that, not only the freer I will be, the happier I will be, but also the more effective I will be in what Christ has meant us to be his living stones, his living disciples in the middle of the world, to evangelize and to bring the good news. A person who is not alive in love cannot be a great disciple, because something's missing. They're not alive. And gosh, I've come across them, and I'm sure you have too, lots of disciples of Christ who would never attract someone else to follow Christ, because they're just not joyful, they're not happy. And they think they're being very disciplined and very virtuous in controlling themselves, but they've in fact choked up their lives. Love appears with endless variety: kindness, attraction, commitment, sexuality, intimacy, concern, simple appreciation, on and on. There are good feelings like tenderness, connectedness, and warmth, those things we immediately assign or connect with love. But there are also unpleasant feelings like grief, loneliness, and fear. These are all signs of love in your life, in my life. If we don't have them, well, there's something missing, because to grieve and to feel loneliness and to feel fear is a sign that we actually have loved and that have been connected with someone, and that someone's gone, and why we feel their emptiness. So they're all signs to us of our capacity for loving. See if you can appreciate the range of feelings that accompany love for you. The good and the not so good, the blissful and the downright scary and terrifying. Your sense of the depth and breadth of love. Then, very quietly, ask what all these feelings might have in common. So just ask yourself that now. The different range of feelings that you associate with love. What is it that makes you call it love? What is the basic quality of loving someone or something? What is it to be loved? We often attach action and knowing and feeling as somehow parts of loving. But there's more to loving than any of these three, even though they certainly are there. Because love, remember, we said a moment ago, is something that cannot be understood fully. So we're participating in something that we kind of understand. There's this drive within us that makes us surge forward to want to give ourselves genuinely to another person or to another thing. Because we love objects too, remember? And we love our pets, we love our cars, we love our computers, we love our phones, we appreciate them. And we sense that we actually love them, even though we may not like to admit this, when we get a scratch on our car. When our phone, we drop it, as if we've hurt ourselves, There's a real loving there. And I know we may not like to admit that, but we do love these things. We love our clothes, our bags, whatever it is, our possessions. Reflect once again on your experiences of love from the standpoint of action and knowing as well as feelings. What are some of the activities, the doings of love for you? What are the knowings, the attitudes and realizations, the wisdom of love? Don't try to pull these insights into any final answer. Just let them embellish your story. Your story, your experience of love is the greatest springboard to come and to know your own heart more deeply and to see how you respond to these invitations. The invitation that the Eternal Father has planted inside each one of you, inside each one of us, that makes us ultimately long for Him. So any invitation to love that comes to us is an invitation to love Him. And I'll keep stressing this. Love is always more than our actions can do, more than our knowings can understand, and more than our feelings can bear. Doing loving acts, however helpful, is not enough. Thinking loving thoughts, however charitable, is not enough. Feeling loving feelings, however tender, is not enough. Pull them all together, and love still wants more. Give us time, and we will want more love. Give love time, and it will want more of us. So while love is focused on various encounters here and there, it is ultimately something that is pointing beyond itself. It's an invitation, whether the opportunities are big or small, whether they're totally surprising or something that we've experienced actually very commonly. It's always drawing us into a promise of something unbounded, something limitless, something infinite. Which then leads us to a reflection on contemplation, because in our spiritual tradition, and not just in the Christian spiritual tradition, but even in other Eastern traditions, religious traditions, Muslim, there is a contemplative dimension there. There is. And so contemplation might be defined in various different ways, of course, but the way May describes it here, and I think it has a lot of merit, is that contrary to popular understanding, contemplation does not imply quietness or withdrawal. Instead, it is a quality of immediate, open presence that is directly involved with life as it is. A lot of I know Christian spiritual writers will talk about contemplation as, there's a stillness of the mind. And it's true, the mind is not racing around. Very often we're thinking about 5 or 6 things at once, and we're thinking about the next thing while we're still doing this one. So are we really involved in the present moment, if that's what's going on, if that's how we spend our day? And I would say we're not. So contemplation actually allows us to be fully immersed in what we are doing. And when we are truly being contemplatives in the middle of the world, in our work, in our movement with other people, we're attuned to what is going on and fully present. One of the qualities that people have said about Pope Francis and about other world leaders is that when you are in their presence, the person who is with them often feels like they are the only ones in the world for that person. Now that is a beautiful quality, and it's not just, I've heard it said about the Pope, but I've heard it said about a number of others. But when there's a greatness there, contemplation actually helps us to be very present to where we are, because there's just this realization, this awareness, this is where God wants us to be, wants me to be right now. Yesterday afternoon, the news came that there's going to be another temporary or great restrictions, everybody calls it lockdown, but I think things could be actually much worse. And everyone started thinking, what should we do, this and that, what's going to happen, what's the consequences of this? You know what? We are here. We are here in the presence of God. And this is where we're meant to be for the time being. Eventually we'll have to make decisions and move accordingly and respond. But the contemplative is the one who is deeply immersed in the moment. If I could pick another example from the scriptures of where Jesus criticizes the apostles when the boat was being filled with water, and they're drowning, but Jesus is in the stern with his head on a cushion, asleep in the middle of a storm. Now there's a real point there about how hard and how generously Jesus gave himself to us in his ministry. I don't know who can sleep in the middle of a storm, but certainly he did. But the question I want to draw your attention to is, when he wakes up, he accuses the disciples. He says, "Why do you have so little faith?" And presumably with a sternness in his voice. And I ask the question, what is he actually reacting to? Is he reacting to them, waking him up? I mean, when did he expect them to wake him up? When they're blowing bubbles through a straw under the water and the boat has already sunk? Surely not. It's got to be in the way in which they woke him up. That they woke him up as men who did not really believe and understand the identity of who was with them in the boat. It's about their worry, their fretfulness. Whereas the person who is truly contemplative is actually immersed in the moment and knows that God is in that moment with them. So yes, he expected them to wake him up, but not with the worry in their voice, because he takes that worry away. Master, wake up. We really need your help now. We really need your help. We're in a bad way. So they had lost, they forgot what the contemplation really was about. And obviously at that point, and this is a comment that St. Mark is making in the Gospel there, that the identity of Jesus is gradually being revealed. I am proposing that contemplative appreciation is the fullest possible realization of love. It's recognizing the call to respond to love, the call to love, it's responding to love, and it's being there in freedom. But what is the difference between falling in love and being in love? When often two people fall in love with each other, we actually say that when they reach initially there's a liking for one another, and then something happens where the heart skips a beat, where there's a warmth in the emotionally, and the two spouses, or they're not spouses yet, they'll say about one another, "I think I'm falling in love." The very expression means there's a certain helplessness to what's going on. When there's an invitation to love and it's genuine, be it great or small, there's always a certain, and we follow it, a certain helplessness. In other words, we're being drawn. It's not so much coming from the head, there's something that's capturing me. On the other hand, being in love is a decision that we actually choose to stay in this particular place, and that's the contemplative stance. Love pervades our existence in an endless procession of actions, thoughts, and feelings. It's coming through. Those beams of love are always trying to break in and touch us. It is present in any desire, in all feelings of attraction, in all caring and connectedness, intimacy. It embraces us in precious moments of immediate presence. It is also present whenever we experience loneliness, loss, grief, rejection. We may say such feelings of bereavement come from the absence of love, but in fact they are signs of our loving. We think of falling in love as a rare occurrence. but it is the most ordinary of human events. We do it all the time. We fall in love whenever we give ourselves to someone or something. We have fallen in love with everyone and everything we hold dear, with people, objects, activities, thoughts, feelings, hopes, memories, beliefs, even with attitudes and moods. We love our moods, don't we? If we didn't, we probably wouldn't want to stay there. But sometimes we really enjoy them, you know. And as a friend of mine in America used to say to me, you know, we are attached to our sins. If we didn't like to do them, if we didn't like our sins, we probably wouldn't do them, you know. And I think there's truth there. So of course, it's a disordered love in that case, but there is the drawing. It's engaging us into it. More than the surprises of love, I think it is our vulnerability to love, the impossibility of controlling it or securing ourselves within it, that causes us to speak of falling in love. In love, we fall from our pride because we can't control it. I can't dominate the situation. In a sense, the situation dominates me. It overpowers me. In love, we also fall from our sense of mastery and separateness, from whatever towers of false safety we have constructed for ourselves. We fall into wonder and wakefulness, joy and agony. And again, I want to say this, that you being women are much more open, generally speaking, to the mystery of love than a lot of men are, even though we're all called to it, but there's a fear because men often want to work things out from their head, whereas women are open to mystery and they are drawn in by this more readily. And I believe it's for this reason, for instance, why is it that in the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, why is it that Eve is the first one to eat of the forbidden fruit? Perhaps because the woman's nature is more open to beauty and to mystery than that of the man, even though you get men mystics and all of that through the history of the church. But there's something about the woman that is naturally open, and of course then she gives it to the man and they both sin. But yeah, I believe there's often something there. So the surprise of love, and even, for instance, when it comes to problem solving, we see this very readily. A man has a problem and he has to stand back and study it and work it out. A woman doesn't always sit back and study it. She can, but often she'll throw herself into it and she'll work it out as best she can. As she's doing it, she doesn't necessarily know how to do it or what it's going to work out like, but she'll have a go. She's not afraid of the mystery. And that's just part of the wiring that a woman is, that's different from a man. He has to stand back. The idea for a man of throwing himself into a mysterious situation that he knows very little about is actually quite terrifying. Whereas for a woman, no worries, we'll have a go. Sometimes it turns out well, sometimes it turns out badly, but she'll have a go. There isn't that fear. So you can tell he's reflecting obviously on his own experience, but that openness to vulnerability, a woman does so more readily than often a man is willing to do. Obviously a man can learn, and once he learns how to do it, then it becomes more natural to him, but not in the beginning, typically speaking. Falling in love is worth it because it is the doorway into being in love. So yes, there is a helplessness there, but it's the doorway. It is the place where love invites us into itself. Once we have fallen, if we can trust enough, be vulnerable enough to wake up and see where we are, the distinctions blur between lover and beloved. Love no longer has such a clear me and you, no distinct origin and end. Precious moments of presence come more frequently, and it is called communion. falling in love has two. Being in love has one. So the two ends. This falling in love temporarily fills a space, a capacity within us. But being in love opens that space into infinity. If we look for it, we can find the invitation to be in love wherever we have fallen. It exists in all our loves, not just in passion or compassion for other people, but also where we have given ourselves to objects, behaviors, doctrines, and anything else that stimulates our desire. Okay, so now, as we look at the life of the heart, we see that there's a lot of opportunities for loving. But it might seem, well, now that I've gotten onto that right track, therefore I won't look back and I will be fine. But if only if it was so easy or so simple, because the very desire to love in itself promises communion, promises intimacy, promises freedom and the fullness of life. But there's another something else that's lurking in the background: addiction. That's what Gerald May calls addiction. So addiction here is not just the addicted to alcohol or to substance or to sexual things or to acquiring money or wealth, but addiction as the excessive or the possessiveness of love. In other words, loving not for the sake of love, but because I feel good. I like what it does to me. That's what he is calling the addictions here. So he gives some ideas. So now we want to look then at the difference between the freedom in loving and addiction in loving. You'll see this, for instance, you look at a young couple in love, and it's genuine, it's real. But they will often butt heads with each other as the relationship starts to go deeper. Their natural guards, their defensiveness goes down, good. But then as they start to see each other, they will also have a chance to reflect on where is my place in this relationship. Do I love this relationship? Do I love this other because of some good things? There's freedom here, there's life here. Or do I find myself becoming totally dependent upon the other? In other words, they've become my crutch, which is now a sign of an addiction starting to creep in. The pure freedom of love seldom lasts. So in the beginning it promises that. But we realize it's actually not so easy. Oh gosh, I wish it was. But anyway, it's not. Something creeps in and mercilessly restrains it. The something is addiction. This is the second vision of love's mystery. So in the beginning it's freedom. Wow, this is excellent, unbounded. But something else has come in as well. Addiction opposes the freedom of love. I have described the opposition at length in Addiction and Grace. It's another book he has written, Addiction and Grace. But let me summarize it here. So I'm just going to read this. It's a fairly long paragraph, but bear with me, please. Addictions come from a process that is inherent in the functioning of the cells of our brains and bodies. Psychologically, the process is called conditioning, whatever it is. The spiritual term is attachment. How much time the spiritual writers talk about attachments, false attachments? Well, false attachments is what he's calling conditioning, or addictions. Attachment nails the energy of our passion to someone or something, producing a state of addiction. Once addiction takes hold, the loved one becomes an object to which we are bound. The object of addiction may be anything. a person, a place, a substance, a behavior, a belief. Notice he breaks out of the material things. Spiritual things can also be an addiction. And in fact, St. John of the Cross talks about a thing called spiritual gluttony, where a person is actually longing for supernatural experiences, mystical experiences, rather than God who gives them. You know, they're addicted for his gifts rather than him. So it's not real love. So this is not a new idea, but maybe just new language. We come to expect gratification from this object and to want more and more of it. Sooner or later, we realize that we have not only fallen for this thing, we are in bondage to it. Whether we call it dependence or codependence, we have been given away as choicelessly as if sold by a master we never knew existed. Our love, which held such promise of unconditional freedom, has become conditioned and conditional. Wow. The very thing that has drawn me on, that has promised to fulfill my humanity in such a deep way, also comes as flawed. Of course, the explanation for this is back in the sin of our origin, original sin, but it's part of our loving. So all our loving on this earth until the kingdom comes fully is ultimately going to be plagued in some way by at least the tendency of addiction. Let's move on. The first freedom question, so he proposes now two questions that will safeguard our freedom or help us to keep in mind, because it helps us to check whether in fact our desire for love is in fact being guided properly in well-ordered love, whereas addiction is a disordered kind of love. And we'll find we'll hover between one and the other because we're ultimately dealing with something that we cannot understand fully. But we cannot stand back and study it and make sure before we partake of it, because otherwise we will not share in it and we will feel the emptiness of isolation and death. So we're invited to be a part of this process that is dynamic, that is mysterious, that is life-giving. It promises freedom, but it's also plagued by addiction in this sense that Gerald May is describing it. But we push on. So first question, to protect our freedom. How free are we to give up the person or things that we love? How free are we to give up the person or things that we love? Relinquishment is painful in any love. The deeper the love, the more painful the letting go. Just think for a minute, whether it's a person, a lifestyle, a place, possessions. How easy is it? How free are we if we had to? Now don't let your minds run too much, because we're going to bring them back here. We truly lose a part of ourselves when we lose a loved one. So yes, when we're talking about freedom to give up a person, doesn't mean that we don't care. But how enslaved are we? Let's keep going. To the extent we are free, we know we could bear that pain. In other words, it's not going to destroy us. But if we are actually not free and we lose the love, we will feel as if we have been annihilated. Then it's showing that there's an addiction. There's an unhealthy attachment to that love. Somehow it has become disordered. As we become more addicted, however, the relinquishment seems increasingly impossible. We feel we would not lose just a part of ourselves, but our very selves. We feel we could not go on. So we've reached a point of annihilation. The second freedom question is just as painful as the first one. How free are we within our love? So the first one, how free are we to give up the love? The second one is, when we are in this love, and typically this works the best with a person, when we're in loving relationship with a person, but also with things that we love. You know? How free are we within our love? How much space is there for us to be ourselves? To what extent can we play? How much is our freedom confined, restricted, perhaps even imprisoned by our attachment to the person or thing we love? One of the questions I love to ask young couples preparing for marriage is that you are good for each other, that this relationship is healthy and well ordered when you can be yourself with this other person. The person whom we love and loves us ought to be able to allow us to be free to be ourselves. If we feel that to some extent we have to stand on ceremony in the presence of the beloved, then something is not quite right about that. There's an unhealthiness there, and that would mean obviously needs to be worked on, to be resolved, and many conversations. But we're not going to go into that now. But that's it's a very telling question. It's one of those litmus tests, you know. I used to do a questionnaire with young couples, this is many years ago, and one of the questions was to test their idealistic distortion, and it would go like this: there is no other person in the world with whom I could have a happy marriage except my partner. What? 8 billion people in the world, and you think there's only one person? Because that person has become their world, you see, has become their world. And they are incapable of responding otherwise. The truth of the matter is there are many people in the world with whom we could have a happy marriage, if that's our vocation, but it's testing their own capacity to see the relationship. There's an unhealthy attachment at that moment. So, how free am I to leave the relationship or to lose this love? Which doesn't mean we wouldn't suffer terribly the more we love, but that we haven't lost our identity in the relationship. And secondly, that within the relationship, are we free to be ourselves? It is critical to understand what freedom means here, because love is giving of ourselves. It always involves some choice to direct and restrain our behavior. Love means being willing to make sacrifices for someone or something. When we love, we do not follow every impulse that comes along. We have a higher concern, a deeper desire. We value our beloved more than we value our passing whims. The freedom question then is not whether we can do whatever we want, but whether we can do what we most deeply want. Hence, working towards freedom or slavishness towards the addiction within that. Watch two lovers at the beach. They walk closely and slowly, open to all the sights and sounds around them, enjoying the feeling of their togetherness. They play like children. There are many moments of just being in love. Then they separate a little, looking for shells, each trusting in the abiding presence of the other. Their freedom is great, but it is not boundless. There is a limit to how far they will go apart. At some point, one will relinquish his or her own path and return to join the other. Like the ocean by their side, their romance ebbs and flows with freedom and attachment, yet it is all one experience of love. So in the end, as we come to wrap up our time of reflection and prayer together, the life of the heart is drawn forward by this surge to love in all the different forms that takes. And remember, listen to your own story, your own experience of love as your guide here. On the one hand, the love promises deep freedom and openness to a fullness of life, but that cannot last. The addiction element is always there, and we so easily, because we're creatures as we are, we so easily fall for that addictive behavior to love the joy that the beloved brings us rather than the beloved, to love the joy of eating nice food instead of the nourishment that it gives me, to love the nice taste of a glass of red wine. I like red wine, in case you haven't worked it out, but instead of or to fall in love with that and to think, oh well, you know what, it makes me feel very relaxed. It's abusive. It's not healthy. Or to whatever it is, our phones, our computers, our clothes, our possessions, to know that there's a proper way to love those things, and there's always lurking in the background, if we're not careful, that addictive dimension that somehow enslaves us and threatens to sabotage the very joyful wonder that the whole prospect of loving has opened for us in the first place.